Hello everyone, this is me Anna explaining your basic audiology topics. So today I'm going to talk about a clinical topic which might have been confusing for you at multiple points or a portion which you keeps on forgetting if you are not in the practice. So that is masking. Here I'm talking about masking in a very basic level. I'm trying to explain it in a very basic manner. I hope this helps all of you who all are listening. So, what is masking? When we are saying masking, we need to understand what masking is. So, you can look at this image. There's a guy sitting in his sofa or on his couch listening to the music. Assume that this guy is sitting there and somebody rings the bell. That's a calling bell. Do you think he might hear that? He may not. Why do you think that he may not hear that? It's because he's listening to the music in his ears. So whatever he's listening in his ears can mask the sound of the calling bell. Suppose the same guy is sitting there just petting his cat without a headphone. There are more chances that he might hear the calling bell. Why? Because there is no noise that is masking the sound of the calling bell. So this is the basic concept of masking. So basically what the headphone is doing is headphone is masking the sound of the calling bell. So in this case, the signal or the sound that is coming from outside is the calling bell, and the masker or the noise that is masking the signal is the headphone. So I'm just familiarizing you with these two terms. The signal is the sound which is coming, which is supposed to be heard, and the masker is the sound that is masking the signal. Understood? So this is the basic thing about masking. So when it comes to audiometry testing, we need to know a little bit more about a few of the terms to understand more about masking. So there is something called as interaural attenuation. So whenever you're using a transducer, what are the transducers that we usually use? A headphone or an insert or a bond vibrator. So when we basically use this transducers, um, we are mostly giving the sound to one ear, or it's more ear specific. When you assume you're using a headphone, you can present the sound to your right ear as well as your left ear. So when you're presenting sound to the right ear, it is assumed that that person is hearing that sound in the right ear. But when the sound exceeds a certain limit, this headphone have a capacity, and when it goes beyond that, the sound from the right ear can go to the other ear. So the limit above which the sound get transferred from one ear to the other side is called as the IA, or the interaural attenuation. So for each each transducer, the IAs are different. So if you take a headphone, the IAs are somewhere from 40 to 70, but we usually take the lowest limit, that is the 40 dB as our IA. And when it comes to insert, it is somewhere around 70 to 75. And for a bond vibrator is basically vibrating the skull. So it is easy to transfer the sound even when there is very minimal vibration. So the IA for bond vibrator is 0. So that is interaural attenuation, or IA. And there is something called as crossover versus cross hearing. So like how I said, for example, again, I'm taking the headphone as an example. You have a person with a headphone, and as suppose the IA of the headphone is 40 dB. Whenever you're presenting something like a sound above 40 dB, what happens? The sound can go to the other ear, because the maximum IA or the IA of a headphone is 40. Whatever sound is going beyond 40 is going to the other side. So, for example, if I'm presenting 50 dB through a headphone, 10 dB can go to the other side. So that is crossover. The sound, how much ever is going to the other side, is crossing over. Is it necessary that even though this 10 dB went to the other side, that person might hear that 10 dB in the other side? No. For example, if my left ear is, or the threshold of my left ear is 15 dB, and the sound coming from here is 10 dB, will I hear that? I will not, because my threshold is 15 dB, which means in order for me to hear in the other side, I need a sound above my threshold. So if my threshold is 15 dB in my left ear, and if I'm presenting 60 dB in my right ear, because of the IA of the headphone, 60 minus IA is 40. So 20 dB sound is going to the other side. That crossover of 20 dB is happening. When 20 dB comes here, my threshold is 15. So 20 minus 15, at least 5 dB sound I might hear in the other side. So when I'm hearing that sound, that is when cross hearing is happening. I hope that is clear. Okay. Uh, why do we need masking? Okay. We do masking. We are doing masking. Why are we doing masking? It is to get a ear specific response. So like I said, you can think of the guy wearing the headphones, sitting in his home, chilling and not listening to the sound of whatever is happening outside. Similar way, when you're doing an audiometry testing, like the examples which we have just spoken about, um, suppose a person is sitting with a headphone, his threshold is, again, we'll take the same value. One ear is 15 dB, other ear is 60 dB. You're putting the headphones on, you track the left side. Suppose I am the patient, I have 15 dB in my left ear. That is tested, cleared. Now I'm testing the right side. Whenever you're presenting 60 dB is when I'm hearing the sound. I am saying I heard the sound. But does that mean 60 dB is my threshold? It may not. Why? When you're presenting 60 dB here, 20 dB sound is going there. That 20 dB is above my threshold, so I can hear that. I might detect that sound and say that I heard. But where are you presenting the sound? You're presenting the sound in the right ear. But still I heard the sound and I might say that I heard the sound. But is that the actual response from my right side? No, it is my left side responding to that sound because the sound is cross heard in the other side. Which means whatever response you're getting right now at 60 dB may not be the actual response of your right side. So in that case, to find out the actual response of your right side or the ear specific response, what you need to do masking. So that is one point. And the other point is to avoid the participation of the other ear. So when you give too much of noise to the one side, just like the guy with the headphone did not hear the calling bell, when you give some noise to one side, that side is masked. That side won't participate in the response. Rather, you might get the response from the ear which you are testing. So these are the two reasons why we need masking. So while doing air conduction testing, this noise or the sound can reach the other side through two pathways. One is the air conduction pathway, other is the bone conduction pathway. Again, we are taking the example of the 60 dB and the 15 dB that we just spoke about. So whenever there is a sound going beyond the IA of the transducer, the sound can go to the other ear through the air and go to my ear canal, go into my middle ear, then go to my cochlea, just like how the air conduction sound passes. But in this, there is a problem. When there is a crossover, cross hearing happens through air conduction, what happens is like there are chances of a lot of attenuation, a lot of sound getting diminished on the way because it has to come from here, it gets absorbed to the surface, then it has to go through the ear canal. If there is wax, some of them gets absorbed, then go to the middle ear, some energy is lost, and go to the cochlea. So there is a attenuation happening. But whenever you're placing the headphone, not just when you're placing the bone vibrator, but even when you place a headphone, the diaphragm vibrates. That vibration is felt in our skull. So that vibration is getting directly transferred when you're presenting a very high sound to go beyond the interaural attenuation of the transducer. There is a huge amount of vibration happening, and that vibration can get transferred quickly and the other cochlea can respond. So whenever there is a cross hearing happening, the major role of the IA is through our bone conduction pathway. We have an air conduction pathway, we have a bone conduction pathway. Even when we are using a headphone, the sound which is reaching the other ear might be mostly reached through our bone conduction pathway. So how do we calculate the IA? We told there is an interaural attenuation for each of the transducer, but we need to see if there is an interaural effect of interaural attenuation happening in our test, during our test. Okay, so for example, assume this person's name is A. So he's having a threshold of 45 dB in his right ear. I did the test, and I'm doing the test in the left ear. His threshold is somewhere around 45 dB. So if threshold of right ear is 45 and left ear is 45, how much of a difference is there between both the ears? 45 minus 45, that is 0 dB. Okay. So if there is a headphone with a threshold of not IA of headphone is 40 dB. So if the IA of the headphone is 40 dB, whenever there is a sound coming from the headphone, when you're presenting 45 dB in the right ear, how much of the sound is going to the other ear? 5 dB is going to your left ear. But even if 5 dB go there, will this person hear 5 dB? No, because his threshold is 45 dB. Threshold means the minimum level at which he is detecting the sound is 45 dB. So whatever below that 45 dB you present, he will not hear. So crossover might happen, cross hearing is not happening. So there is no effective interaural attenuation happening there. So in order to understand how much of the sound is cross hearing, that is how we calculate the IA. So that means if you subtract both the ears, 45 minus 45, that is 0. So that means there is no much difference between both the ears. So whenever you're presenting at the same level, a 0 dB sound is heard in the other ear. But if you're presenting something above this one, suppose you're presenting at 50 dB and the difference between both the ears is 5 dB, you might hear 5 dB in the other ear. Okay. So IA is basically calculated by subtracting the threshold at the test year minus the threshold of the non-test year. So threshold of test year minus threshold of no, just reduce the threshold of both the years. You will get how much of an interaural attenuation is happening, or how much effect of interaural attenuation is happening during that particular test can be calculated using this formula. Okay, so now take the example of this case. One ear is 45 dB, other ear is 35 dB. So our test ear is right ear. So test ear minus non-test ear, there is a IA difference of 10 dB. So headphone again has a IA of 40 dB. So when you're presenting 45 dB, what happens? A 5 dB sound is again going to the other ear. Will you hear that? You'll not. Okay, but uh, you can see that there is a difference of 10 dB here. But if you're taking the 35 here, instead of the headphone, assume that you used a bone vibrator, that is a BC. So in that case, what happens is like, again, you're presenting 45 dB here. And how much will be gone to the other side? You just need anything above 0 dB will be going to the other side. So 45 dB will be going to the other side. Will he hear or not hear? He will hear because his threshold is 35 dB. So the IE also depends on the transducer that you're using. So for example, if you're using headphone, in order for him to hear the sound or the sound to go to the other side, you need something above 40. That is like only 10 dB is going. But when you're using a bone vibrator, the entire sound is getting transferred. So all 45 is going to the other side and he may respond to that sound. Okay. So now consider this example. He has a 65 dB in one side, 50 dB in other side. How much will be the IA? 65 minus 15, that will be somewhere around 40 dB. Another one, the 40 dB. Okay. So IA or the interaural attenuation can depend on three factors. One is the transducer. So whichever transducer that you're using, depending on that, the IA might vary. For example, if you're using a headphone versus a bond vibrator versus an insert, there can be a huge difference. So for a bond vibrator, the IA is 0. But for the headphone is somewhere from 40 to 75. So we take it as 40, okay. And for inserts, it is above, it is 75, and sometimes we say 50 to 75, okay. And even within the headphones itself, there is a difference. So whenever the area of contact between the transducer and our skull increases, IA reduces. For example, when the area is very small, when you have an insert, the sound which might go out will be very, very less. So whenever the surface area is less, IA value is very high. So when you're using an insert, you need at least 70 dB sound to make it to cross over, make the sound to cross over to the other side. So it's always better to use an insert compared to that of a headphone or a bond vibrator to avoid interaural attenuation or crossover or cross hearing. So in that case, majority of the cases, you may be able to avoid masking also if you're using inserts. And in the headphones also, supraoral has comparatively lesser circumference to that of circumoral. So supraoral will have a little bit higher IA than that of circumoral headphone. This is how it works. So this is just the values of how much of the IA that inserts have based on different literatures that I've referred to. Then the second factor that might affect the IA is the frequency spectrum of the signal. So if you see, some sounds have a larger wavelength, some high frequency sounds have a shorter wavelength. So depending on all these factors, also again, the how much of sound is getting transferred to the other ear might vary. Not going in depth to that. And also it can vary depending on individual subjects, just like how we saw in the example. It depends on the person's threshold also, how much is being heard, how much is not heard. So all these factors can affect the interaural attenuation. So when do we mask? So now we know why we need to mask. So when are we going to mask? When do we know that we need to mask? In this case, there is a masking required. There is, this is not the actual threshold of the other ear. We need to mask and do the testing. So in order to know that, there is a formula. So to know whether we need to do AC testing, we have to calculate the AC threshold of our test year. So whichever year you're testing minus the bond conduction value of our non-test year, that is the better year. And when you compare these two, if there is a greater difference than the interaural attenuation of whatever you are using, then you need to do masking. That is like we told earlier that majority of the sound is crossing over to the other ear through our bond vibration or through bond conduction, even though you're using a headphone. So if you compare the threshold, whatever you're getting in the test year right now, that is like the poorer year when you tested, you suppose you got 65 and the BC of the other year is somewhere around 15. Whenever a sound is reaching above 15, they are hearing that. So there are chances that there might be crossover. So what you're going to do, you're going to compare the non-test year or sorry, the test year, the poorer year threshold minus the BC of the better year, that is 15. So 65 minus 15 is 40. And if I'm using headphone, if it is greater than or equal to 40, then I will have to do a masking. Okay. So this is the criteria for AC masking. Or you can just calculate if you haven't done BC for that patient, you can just compare the AC of test year minus the AC of the non-test year. And if it is greater than IA, then again, that is like the AC of the poorer year minus the AC of the good year or the better year. If it is greater than or equal to IA, then again, you can do the masking. Okay. So again, I'm taking the same example. Okay. Here he has 1 year 65 dB, other year 15 dB. So if suppose we haven't done BC for this patient, then what will be the formula? AC of the test year, that is the poorer year, minus the AC of the non-test year, that is 65 minus 15 dB. How much is that? 40 dB. So 40 dB is equal to or greater than the IA of the headphone. Then what we'll have to do? We'll have to do masking in this case. Okay. The calculations are a little bit wrong. Sorry. Um, so this is for the AC testing. So whenever you're doing BC testing, when to mask is whenever there is an airborne gap greater than 15 dB, we'll have to do the masking. What is the airborne gap? Airborne gap is the difference between the like AC threshold of the test year and the BC threshold of your non-test year, or whatever BC that you've got, the better year BC. Okay, that is the airborne gap. So whatever threshold you've got for the poorer year minus whatever BC you've got for both the years. So you'll be basically doing BC for 1 year initially. So that unmasked BC, the difference between the test year threshold, AC threshold minus the unmasked BC will give you the airborne gap. And if this gap is greater than 15 dB, you will have to do BC masking. Okay, so in this example, if you see, I'm just going to take the 500 hertz frequency. So we need to see if we have to do BC masking. Assume that this is, sorry, assume that this BC, whatever you're seeing, is the better year BC or the unmasked BC. Then if you're taking the threshold here, 60 minus 15 is 40. So you will have, is it greater than 15 dB, or so that is the airborne gap. The AC of the test here, that is 60, minus the unmasked BC, that is 15. So we are getting 40 dB. 40 dB is greater than 15 dB. So definitely you'll have to do a BC masking. And do we have to do AC masking? Do we? You can put the formula here. So you can take the AC of the non-test year minus the BC of the test year. How much are you getting again? 45 dB, 40 dB. So again, it is greater than or equal to the IA. That is greater than or equal to the IA of the headphone. That is somewhere around 40. You will have to do AC masking also. I hope this is understood. So now when we do, we just don't stop our testing just with AC or BC bond conduction testing. We'll have to do speech audiometry also. So when do we do masking for speech audiometry? Whenever the presentation level for the test year, that is the poorer year, when you present speech SRT, the presentation level, how do we calculate the presentation level? So that will be starting from the threshold or PTA average plus 20. So the presentation level here is 60. I am just taking all three frequencies is 60 for easier calculation. If it is all three 60, 60 plus 20 will be 80 dB. So that 80 dB minus how much is the BC? Again, I'm taking it as all 5, 5, 5, 5. Don't look at the audiogram, just take it as 5, 5, 5. So 5 will be the BC average. So how much is that? 60 minus 5 is 55. It is greater than the IA of the headphone. So I will have to do a speech masking. Or suppose you already got your SRT, speech recognition threshold, or speech detection threshold, then you can take the, when you're doing SRS, speech word recognition score or speech recognition score, you can use this formula, that is the speech recognition threshold of the test year minus the speech threshold of the non-test year. If it is greater than or equal to the IAs, then you can then you will have to do a speech masking. Okay, and these are just few tips, like whenever you get a flat to sloping audiogram, that is like a sloping audiogram, then if you are going to do for any supra-threshold test means any speech test where you're presenting speech in a very loud voice above the threshold, then you will have to do masking. Okay, if it is a sloping, in the low frequencies it might be better, you might not have to do what to say, masking, or when you take the average you might not have to do masking, but if it is sloping, it's always better to do masking for a supra-threshold speech testing. And if you use inserts, majority of the cases you can avoid masking. Be it AC masking or speech masking, you might not have to do if you are using inserts because of the larger IA of our inserts. Okay, now we're moving on to the masking concepts. So there is something called as masking paradigm. Don't get confused by the bigger term. It's just that there are two types of masking. You can do ipsilateral masking and contralateral masking. Okay, what do you mean by ipsilateral masking? Again, go back to the guy sleeping in the sofa with the headphone on. Okay, what is the masker? The noise that is blocking the signal. What is the signal? Signal is the calling bell which he was supposed to hear. Similar way, if during a testing, if you are presenting the test signal, that is the pure tone, to one ear, and you're giving the noise in the same ear, so then that is a ipsilateral masking. But if you are presenting the test signal to one ear and the noise to the other ear, then it will become contralateral masking. Okay. And there are different types of noises. Okay. Like how we said. So I hope ipsilateral and contralateral masking is clear. Most of the cases when you're doing AC or BC masking or speech masking, we are giving contralateral masking. That is, we are giving the tone in one ear, that whichever ear we are testing, and we are giving the noise in the other ear. When we are doing tests like spin, that is speech perception and noise and all, we give noise and the tone to the same ear. Okay, that is when we do ipsilateral masking. So for masking, we have to give a masker, a sound to mask the like what to say participation of one ear. What are we giving as a masker? We're giving noise. This noise itself is of different types. So we have narrowband noise, we have white noise, we have speech noise. So what is narrowband? What is the difference between all these noises? So before knowing that, you need to know something called as a critical band. What do you mean by critical band? So whenever you're presenting 1,000 Hz pure tone, it will not be just 1,000 Hz. It will just directly go to your cochlea, activate that region which says 1,000 Hz. No, it activates a band of frequencies. It is activating a small band of frequency. I've just taken an example. Suppose its bandwidth, it's somewhere around 20 plus or minus 20. Then when you're presenting 1,000 Hz, the region from 980 to 1,020 might get activated whenever you're presenting the tone. So whenever you're masking the same tone, you will have to cover that entire region. That so much noise should be given that all the entire area which is getting alert when you're presenting a sound should be masked. So that is a critical band of a particular frequency that has to be noted when you think about the noise. So when it comes to narrowband noise is like the pure tone of the noise. That means you can give frequency specific. So you have 1,000 Hz pure tone, just like that you have 1,000 Hz narrowband noise. So this 1,000 Hz narrowband noise might give noise to that 1,000 Hz region or the critical band of this 1,000 Hz. So whenever you want to mask a particular frequency, some cases you can use narrowband noise. But many of the cases we use white noise because white noise is much more broadband noise. Broadband noise means whenever you're presenting a noise, it will not just be 1,000 Hz or the critical band of 1,000 Hz. It will have more components beyond that 1,000 Hz. It has a very broad band of frequencies. The critical band is not so small. So sometimes it will be like too much masking also. So we may not use white noise as well. Then speech noise. Speech noise is like a broadband noise, but the stimulus will be like speech babbles or the speech noises, and this can be used when you're using a speech masking. Okay. And there is something called as effective masking level. So effective masking level is clear from the term itself, like effective masking level. So effective masking level is the masking level or the level that is required to effectively mask a tone. So if again, I'm going back to the guy sleeping in the couch with a headphone. If his volume is very low, very subtle, and if he's listening to very calm noise, he might hear to the calling bell ringing. But if his volume is a little high or the sound is little, what to say, it's if he's listening to some pops, then he might not hear the calling bell. So there is a level. Um, there has to be a certain level to mask the other sound. So that level is called as effective masking level. So if you go look into the definition, it will say 50% of the chances of detecting a sound is cancelled, then that is called as an effective masking level. Okay. So now we are moving on to the masking procedures. Now we understood why we need to mask. Why do we need to mask? We need to get the your specific response. So when are we masking? Whenever the sound is either greater than the difference is greater than our IA of the transducer, or when the ABG gap is more, we might have to do the masking. So how are we going to do the masking? We need to know two values. Excuse me. So one is the minimum masking level and the other one is the maximum masking level. So what is the minimum masking level? It is clear from the term itself, the minimum noise that we have to give. Okay. So for example, I am presenting a 50 dB sound. And so my threshold is 50 dB in 1 ear, and I'm giving a noise of 40 dB. What happens? Still, it is not heard, right? Suppose my threshold is 50 dB in my right ear. Okay. And I am presenting a noise of 40 dB. Will I hear that noise? I'll not hear that noise, and that noise won't have any effect. Why? Because 50 dB is the minimum sound required for me to hear that. It is similar to a person, normal hearing person hearing 0 dB or 5 dB. Similar to that is how I'm listening at 50 dB because my threshold is 50 dB. So if my threshold is 50 dB, in order for me to hear some sound should be above or equal to 50 dB. But if I'm presenting a noise of 40 dB, will I hear that? I will not hear that. If I'm not hearing that, will it have any effect? It will not have any effect. So even though I'm presenting 40 dB noise, there is nothing happening. There is under masking happening. So in order to prevent this under masking, we need to know how much of a minimum masking we have to give, okay, to obtain a effective masking. Then there is something called as maximum masking level. So this is like how much of a noise I can give during the testing. So again, if I take another example, from suppose my threshold is somewhere around 70 dB, not my threshold, but the maximum noise. Even if I give 70 dB, it masks the other ear. But if anything goes beyond 70 dB, it becomes too much of noise for me. So suppose I'm presenting, instead of 70, I'm presenting 90 dB. It'll be too much of noise even when you're presenting the actual sound in the other ear. So suppose somebody is screaming in your one ear and the other person is speaking, you might not hear that even if he's speaking at the normal level of your right ear. Why? Because that sound is too much. So this might happen if you're presenting too much of noise. They might not respond at their actual threshold also. That case is called as the over masking. So in order to avoid over masking, we have something called as a maximum masking level. So before starting masking, we need to calculate these two values, that is minimum masking level and the maximum masking level. Okay. So how do we calculate the minimum masking level or the initial masking level? So in order to calculate the initial masking level for a AC testing, what you have to do is like you have to calculate the AC threshold for the non-test ear, that is the normal ear or the better ear, and you will have to add a 10, that is for the safety factor, so that it will not be too low, there will not be any under masking. So we are adding a 10 dB. So if you take the example of Mr. A, he is having 65 dB in right ear and he has 15 dB in left ear. Then based on this formula, how much is his initial masking level? So AC of threshold of the non-test ear, that is 15 dB plus a safety factor of 10 dB. How much? 25 dB. So you will have to at least give a 25 dB noise to the left ear and then test his right ear to get a good response. Okay. So that is the initial masking level. But if you're doing BC, then the initial masking level will be different. That is the same. AC threshold of your better ear, that is 15 dB, plus the safety factor 10, that is 25. But you will have to add something called as an occlusion effect or the factor of occlusion effect. I'll tell you what is occlusion effect. So if you're sitting somewhere, just put a hand or a finger on your tragus, close your ear and talk to yourself. You will feel that some sounds are a little bit louder, or you're hearing your sound from the ear a little bit more louder. This is called as the occlusion effect. So whenever there is a closure, the low frequency sounds tend to get amplified. or you will feel that it is amplified. That is the occlusion effect. So whenever you're doing a BC testing, what happens? Whenever you're doing an AC testing, we are placing the headphone like this. That means we are closing the ear. So there can be this occlusion effect happening. Yes. But when you're doing bone conduction testing, BC goes behind your ear. So we are not basically closing our pinna or the conga. So there is no occlusion effect happening. So whenever you're doing a BC masking, you have to consider this, because whenever you're doing BC masking, you're not just placing the bone vibrator, you're also putting the headphone. So this add-on effect might come and the person might respond quicker for a lower frequency. So what you can do, you can just add that extra how much might be coming to avoid the under masking or whatever. So we'll have to add the occlusion effect. So if you see for a headphone at 250 hertz, you will have to add a 30 dB of occlusion effect. 500 it'll be 20, 1 kilohertz will be 10. Okay, but if you're using an insert, then only for 250 and 500 hertz, you might have to add 10 dB of occlusion effect factor. And if a patient is having a conductive hearing loss, or if his airborne gap is more than 20 dB, that means their middle ear is already closed. So there will not be any occlusion effect. So you need not have to add the occlusion effect factor if a person is having a conductive hearing loss or a greater ABG gap. Okay. Now, maximum masking level. Now we know what is a minimum masking level. Now we have to see what is the maximum masking level, maximum noise that we can give. In order to calculate the maximum masking level, we need to get the BC of the test year, whichever year we are doing the test year, plus the IA minus 5 dB. So BC of the test year, suppose we got a BC of 25 dB. And how much is the IA when you're using a headphone? That will be 25 plus 40, 65 dB minus 5, that will be 60 dB. Okay, now we are moving on to the test procedure. So here I am just explaining the plateau method. Depending on your clinic, or depending on the setting where you're working, there might be different methods which can be used. But I always prefer to use the plateau method because this is more reliable. So now we know why we are doing masking, when we are doing masking, and what is the initial masking, how much of noise we can give, how much maximum noise we can give during masking. Now we are directly going to test a patient. So while testing a patient, what we have to do is, like, initially we'll have to calculate his threshold. So I got one ear threshold as 15 dB, other ear as 65 dB. So once you get the threshold, now what you have to do is, like, you have to see the criteria. What is the criteria? I'm just taking the example of a BC masking. So now you have to see if there is a ABG gap greater than or equal to 15 dB. So for example, ABG gap is what? Here the AC is 65 dB and the BC, whatever you've got, the unmasked BC is 10 dB. So 65 minus 10 is somewhere around 65 minus 10 is somewhere around 55 dB. So 55 dB, yeah, 55 dB. So 55 dB is greater than 15 dB. So criteria is satisfied. You will have to do BC masking. Yes. So once you know that you have to do masking, you have to calculate the initial masking level. How do we calculate the initial masking level for BC? You have to calculate the AC threshold of your non-test ear. Non-test ear is left ear. So you have to take the AC threshold of your left ear, that is 15 dB, plus the safety factor 10, that is 25, plus the occlusion effect. Assume that I'm taking a higher frequency, then there is no occlusion factor. So that will be 25 dB will be the initial masking level. So I can give noise 25 dB to start with. Okay. Once I give that 25 dB noise, I'll have to track the threshold in the right ear. So I'm giving 25 dB noise to the left ear. I'm presenting pure tone to the right ear, and I'm tracking his threshold. Suppose when I'm doing the testing with more noise, then if this threshold changes, suppose 65 becomes 70, that is, there is a threshold shift. If there is a threshold shift happening, that is, threshold shift is positive, then whatever 65 we got earlier then we had an involvement of your left ear. So you can understand that 65, we got a response in 65 because the left ear or the better ear responded. If there is no threshold shift, even after you giving a noise here, you're still getting 65 dB, then you know that, okay, whatever response you got can be from the right ear itself. Okay. This is how how you understand whether there was a participation of the better ear or not. So now we know we will track the threshold, AC, BC thresholds, and we'll check for the criteria. Then we calculate the initial masking level, and then we see if there is any threshold shift happening. Now, if there is a threshold shift, we have to track down the actual threshold of our right ear. So how are we gonna do that? To calculate, again, we are going, in order to do the testing, what we have done, we've given the initial masking level. Initial masking level was 25. So whenever I gave 25 at 65, he did not respond. So what I'll do, I will increase the sound here. Suppose I increase 10 dB. I increased 10 dB, it will become 75. So when I'm giving a 25 dB noise to the left ear and a 75 dB tone to the right ear, he responded. Does that mean that is his threshold? No. Now what I have to do in plateau method is like, now I'll have to increase the noise. Suppose you can increase the noise by 5 dB or 10 dB steps. Here, for example, I'm taking an increment of 10 dB steps. Now I increased the noise to 35. When I increased noise to 35, here the sound is constant. I'm presenting 75 now. Will he respond? He, he may, but in this case, he didn't respond. So when I presented 75 dB, he is not responding. Here 75 dB sound is going. Here 35 dB noise is going. He is not responding at 75. So I increase another 5 dB. That is, I am presenting 80 dB here. So when I presented 80 dB with a 35 dB noise to the opposite ear, he responded. Oh, so he responded. Does that mean that is his threshold? No, we have to confirm. So now what I'm going to do is like I increase the noise again. So I'm increasing the noise to another 10 dB. That is, I made the noise to 45 dB. Now I'm presenting 45 dB. And with the same 80 dB, I'm doing the testing and he's responding at the 80 dB. That means even though I'm increasing the noise, he is still responding at the same level. That means he has obtained the plateau. So his threshold is 80 dB. So if his threshold is 80 dB, so wherever he has obtained that plateau, that is taken as his threshold. So here his actual threshold for the right ear will be 80 dB. Is that clear? So I'll just summarize. So we will have to start with the threshold testing. You will have to do the track the threshold. You will have to then check for the criteria, calculate the initial masking level. Once you get the initial masking level, you have to present the noise and track the threshold if there is a threshold shift. And once you get the response, you increase the noise, and if he is responding at the same level, you can stop the test. If he is not responding, you increase the tone and even then again increase the noise, and if he is responding at the same level, take that level as the response. This is how a plateau method for masking works. Then there is something called as masking dilemma. Masking dilemma is basically an issue. We are having a problem. So when do we have a problem? When the initial masking level is greater than the maximum masking level. Suppose my initial masking level, for example, take this case. So usually this happens when the person is having a conductive hearing loss or a BC is so good and the AC is affected. That is when you get masking dilemma, or whenever there is a loss greater than 60 dB, you may get masking dilemma. So basically conductive hearing loss greater than 60 dB. So how much will be the initial masking level? Assume the initial masking level is AC of non-test ear, that is AC of the right ear is 55 dB, plus how much is the safety factor? 10. So here I'm not taking the occlusion effect. So 55 plus 10, 65. I'm taking the occlusion effect as 10 dB because it is 1000 Hertz. Then we will get a initial masking level of 75. So I have to start the masking with 75 dB. So if I use the maximum masking level formula, what is the maximum masking level formula? Maximum masking level is the BC of the test ear. How much is the BC? 0. Plus how much is the IA? If I'm using headphone, it is somewhere around 40. So 40 plus 0, 40 minus 5 dB, that is 35. So the maximum noise I can give for this testing is 35. How can the maximum noise be 35 when the initial noise is 75? So I have to start with 75, but I can't go beyond 35. So there's a problem. This doesn't work. That is when we're having a masking dilemma. In such cases, one solution is using inserts. So when you use inserts, IA will change. So this value will vary. It will become much more higher. IA for inserts is 75. But this particular case, if you see, suppose the threshold was little less, it might have worked. But for this particular case, it will not work. Why? Again, the formula is same here. The initial masking level is 75, but the maximum masking level will be BC of test here 0 plus IA is 70 or 75. And if it takes 75 also, 75 minus 5 is 70. Again, it is lesser than this thing. So in such cases, you can do the SAL test, that is the sensory acuity level test, which I'm not going to explain in this one. So that is one solution. So whenever there is a masking dilemma, one way to solve it is using inserts. The other one is to use SAL test. Okay. And now speech masking. How do we do speech masking? Is like for the speech masking, the initial masking level will be the presentation level of the test here. That is, whenever you're doing SRT or STT, whatever is the presentation level, suppose if it is 80 dB, then 80 dB minus IA. If you're using a headphone, 80 minus IA 40, that'll be 40 plus whatever is the largest ABJ gap that you have got in that particular audiogram, then you will get the initial masking level. And this is maximum masking level. Okay, it's not the initial masking level. For the maximum masking level, you will have to take the best BC, that is the good BC, plus how much over IA minus 5 dB. Oh, sorry, you can use this one also for the initial masking level. This is again the initial masking level formula for speech masking. Then there is something called the central masking. I'm not going in depth about central masking or any of such things, because we're just making this a very basic presentation. So central masking, there is something called a central masking. I just want you all to be aware of that. So central masking is like, even when you're giving a very small masking level, that you might think that the sound is not masking the other side, or sound is not reaching the other side. But at some point, even when you're presenting on the same level, somewhere at your superior or very complex level, or wherever there is a like crossover or bilateral interaction is happening, there is a little bit of masking happening, even though externally sound is not getting crossed over. So we have spoken about crossover, cross hearing and all in the earlier slides. So even when there is a crossover, in order for a crossover to happen, we need sound beyond the IA of your headphone. Even if that is not there, but the sound is louder, some amount of masking, very small, like somewhere around 5 dB of masking might happen within our head. That is called a central masking. So there are something called as informational masking, central masking, peripheral masking, which we will not be talking in this PPT. So this is very basic. So I hope the concept is clear, why we are doing masking, when to do masking, and what is the formula for initial and maximum masking level, and like what is the plateau method. If you have any doubts, again, you can put it in the comments. You can give your suggestions. You can comment your opinion. If you want to add on points, you can add on. This is just based on my I've just referred cats for this one. And if you want to add on any other points, anything else, you are free to do that. I hope this portion is clear. I know the presentation is a little longer. I wanted to make it very clear. This is more like a tuition. It's not like a quick PPT. I hope this is helping you all. Thank you for listening. Bye.